Hello everybody. Now, ever the optimist, I'm still hoping that things largely get back to normal. I'm going to give you a chance because this is Chinese New Year this week and I know it's upset the way things work. So what I'm doing is we're going to skip ahead slightly in the book and avoid the next exercise. The reason being, it's only going to work properly if you're all in school. And at the moment, nobody's in school. In this class, nobody at all. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip forward to the next section that I can do like this, where I talk to you, and we'll go through that briefly, and then hopefully next week when there's people back in school, we can actually do the scripts properly. If not, I don't know how we're going to get through this unit when there's nobody here doing any kind of reading out and performances in front of the class. This is literally a whole section on performance, and without it, I don't know what we're going to do. Does that sound like mild panic? Well, it is. So, imagine. So we're going to skip forward to page 155, and we're going to look at a song by a performer, John Lennon. Now, those of you that don't know, and you're pretty young, so fair play, the Beatles changed the world in the early 60s. They changed the world by being a rock band they just captured the imagination of everybody. They started out as pretty soft rock, and then they moved to kind of more independent stuff, which would have been considered fairly independent at the time. And they got very, very heavily into drugs, One of their famous songs was Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, which spells out LSD, because they were on drugs. Another one was about a walrus, boo boo be doo, and all that kind of nonsense. They were very, very into drugs. They were crazy, which was fun. They released a load of movies. They weren't actors, so the movies were pretty terrible, but it gave you another insight into the sort of people they were. And they spawned this huge movement. Now, legend has it that in I think it's late 67, one of the band members died. The main two members of the band were John Lennon, who did instrumentals and most of the writing, and Paul McCartney. And legend has it that Paul McCartney got drunk, had a car crash, went off the road and died, and was replaced by a double. Now, I read about this fairly recently, a few years back, and I thought, oh, what a load of crap, because Paul McCartney's still alive right now, still releasing music. And it said, well, here's the evidence. He died in late 1960s and was replaced. And when you look at it, they took a hiatus. They paused, they came back, released one more album, the Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which was very, very different in tone and style. And then they all kind of broke off and did their own thing. The band just broke up for no good reason, and they all went off doing different projects. John Lennon went off and did a solo career, which was very, very successful. Paul McCartney went off and got married and formed Wings, which was very unsuccessful. They were absolutely dreadful. And the other two guys went off and did their own thing as well. Also, when they came back, Paul McCartney looked very different. He'd shaved his head more, his hair was shorter, but he looked 10 years older, and he did look very different. But I still didn't believe it. I still just read the article and thought, yeah, okay, and maybe there's something to it, I don't know. But then there was this other piece of evidence that way back in the 70s when this happened, people were talking about it as if it was absolutely known. People were talking about it back then, before I was born, and were saying, yep, that's not Paul McCartney, something's happened. They've replaced him. So a music magazine, NME, did a review. They hired a forensic scientist to debunk the theory. So he went through photographs, he went through plaster casts, and he came back in the NME, in the mainstream media, and came back and said, yes, this is probably not Paul McCartney. So, we don't hear about this anymore, but way back, yeah, it looked like Paul McCartney really was replaced. So John Lennon went off and did his own thing. And he became a hippie. He became sort of Buddhist, and he became very into peace, change the world, get rid of the industrial military complex, and change the world. And then he was assassinated. Martin Chapman walked up to him, shot him several times, and then stood there reading a book and let the police arrest him. And no really good reason. I think his excuse was John Lennon was simply too good to be allowed to live. Some crazy nonsense like that. They just walked up to him and shot him. So he died in the 80s. But he released a lot of songs that really captured the imagination. We're going to have a look at one of them today on page 155. So here's the lyrics of it. We'll read through it. Normally I would give you an exercise. I've got an exercise where the lyrics are all broken up and I play the song over and over and you put the lyrics back together. But there's absolutely no way we can do that when every single one of you will simply cheat. So there's no way. So I'm going to read through it and then we'll read through it again and we'll do a little breakdown of what it all means so that we're all on the same page and we'll understand each other. So here's the breakdown of the lyrics. Imagine there's no heaven. It's easy if you try. No hell below us, above us, only sky. Imagine all the people living for today. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for. No religion too. Imagine all the people living life in peace. Imagine no possessions. I wonder if you can. No need for greed or hunger, a brotherhood of man. Imagine all the people sharing all the world. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will live as one. Now this is what I talk about when we discussed poetry earlier. Poetry is a dead medium because no one cares about it anymore. Unfortunately, poetry is like art. It's changed so badly that it now has no more emotional connection to the audience. We don't care about it anymore because it sucks, it's crap. But the spirit of poetry has continued in these kind of songs, in this kind of lyrics. I'm not talking about K-pop where a bunch of pretty girls or weird-looking boys dance around with bad haircuts and that's nonsense. That's just there to entertain teenagers until they grow out of it. But this kind of stuff is meant to convey a message. It's meant to give you ideas to think about, which is what poetry does. It's meant to emotionally stimulate and it's meant to leave you with an impression that is going to change the way you think about things. So let's go through what this is all about. So verse 1, imagine there's no heaven. Now, heaven in all religions is about when we die, we go to heaven. Now, I actually, I did a podcast at the weekend. We discussed simulation theory. Now, those of you that haven't heard about it, simulation theory is the idea that we're all living inside a computer simulation. You've probably heard about it. Elon Musk talks about it a lot. A lot of other people talk about it. A lot of scientists are now saying, yep, it's probably true. And there is evidence for it, but there's lots of evidence for all sorts of things. There's evidence the world is flat. The world is not flat, but there is evidence that it is. You can prove anything these days. We live in a post-fact world. So simulation theory is this new idea. And religion has always worked this way. Christianity introduced the idea of a heaven. There's this heaven up there, this silver city. And if you die and you've been good, you get to go there for eternity. And there will be wonderful things happening. There'll be the best food. There'll be just great stuff. There'll be dogs everywhere to pet. It'll be fantastic. So this is all nonsense. The idea of heaven is a message that we're trying to put across to people. So there's a reason why it's always been called the opium of the masses, the drug of the people, because religion keeps you under control by giving you this idea that so long as you do as you're told now, you'll get a reward later when you're dead. And of course, when you're dead, it doesn't matter anymore because the people in power have used you and your life is over. They've taken away that valuable gift. Simulation theory is threatening to do the same thing because Albert Einstein said, eventually a new form of science will replace religion. There will be a scientific religion, a science-based religion. And now we've got it, simulation theory. And we're slowly seeing that spread throughout the world. It's starting with the intellectuals and it will creep down. The idea that this is all a simulation, which means you don't have to try, you don't have to care, you can give up. It doesn't matter. And that's what religion does. And that's what this line is all about. Imagine there's no heaven. Imagine that you have to live now. Imagine that there's nowhere to go after you die. So this is the time that matters. So everybody is trying to live for the moment. Everybody is trying to get their life in order. They're trying to do things now that matter. Steve Jobs, for instance, when he died, probably not of cancer. The rumor I've heard is that he was dying of something else. When he was dying, he was saying on his deathbed, I regret all the money. I'm not taking the money with me. All of that was meaningless, didn't matter. What I regret is that I didn't spend more time with the people I care about, my family. He realized what really mattered when it was too late to do anything about it. But what if there was no heaven and we knew that that clock is ticking and that every moment, every breath we take matters? We'd live our lives very differently. So it's easy if you try to do that. No hell below us. So again, You're not going to hell if you don't behave. So no government gets to tell you what to do, and if you don't do it, you burn forever in hell. Because the people who are telling us what to do, they're certainly not following those rules. You look at the Clintons. The Clintons want to run the world. They want to run America and, of course, run the world. They are certainly going to hell if hell exists. They are the most vile, awful people. So we don't find that the people telling us what to do are actually doing what they tell us to do. So that's something you want to think about. So there was no hell below us. So there's no danger. There's no risk of eternal damnation. So you can do what you want. The pagans used to have one law: if it harms none, do what thou willst. And that was changed by the elites. They changed that back in the 60s. Aleister Crowley changed it to do what thou willst. So do whatever you want, doesn't matter, because nothing matters. The pagan phrase was, if it doesn't hurt anybody, then do whatever you want. So long as it doesn't hurt anybody, it's fine. So above us, only sky. No heaven, no God telling us what to do, no nonsense, only the sky up above us. So imagine all the people of the world living for today. So today is what matters. Tomorrow isn't here yet. Yesterday is finished. We can't go back and change it. So we're living for the moment, and we're trying to make the best of our lives for ourselves, because we're smart enough to know that when I help you, you're helping me back. So all of us are doing better. Imagine there's no countries. Now this is another one that people often don't get. In Cambodia, you hate the Vietnamese. The Thais hate, well, everybody really. When I went to India, everybody hates the Indians. America, they hate Russia. Russia hates America. England hates France. Everybody hates their next door neighbours. Take England and France. Genetically, we're identical. We're identical. I could take you, any one of you, out and put you in a room with a Frenchman and an Englishman, and you would never be able to tell the difference until they spoke, or until you smelled the Frenchman. People from those countries tend to look identical. Pakistan and India, they're at war with each other, and they are literally the same country. It was only a few decades ago that someone built a wall between them and said, right, split off, now you're two different countries. They are genetically identical people. So imagine we didn't bother with that. Imagine we didn't have these arbitrary lines on a map. Now these lines on a map, all they are is to control you. It's for someone to take power and to take your tax dollars, your money away from you so that they can control you. It's all it's about. Patriotism is control. Okay, so imagine we got rid of that. Imagine if we got rid of the idea that you belong to a country. Now those of you that hold a passport, passports only came out in World War II. In 1939 to 1945, passports were brought in to stop spies creeping in from other countries and pretending to be someone that they weren't. And the promise that the governments gave us was that after World War II is finished, we would get rid of them. So everyone would be free to move around again, just like they were before. Everyone would be free. And of course, that never happened. And of course, it never will. But imagine we could get rid of that. Imagine we could get rid of the idea of countries and people could live wherever they want. That means that poor countries would no longer be poor countries, and rich countries would no longer be rich countries, because it's not sustainable. The poor people would all want to go to the rich countries, and that would make them poor, and vice versa. So it wouldn't work. So every country now has to share their resources and be a different place. You know, you could go to your friend's house because your friend's house is different. Maybe it's quieter, so you can do some research. Maybe it's more fun because they have a bigger TV. So each country now stops being a line on a map where we're not allowed to go, or we are allowed to go, and becomes somewhere that's just different and fun to visit. Culture exists, people are different, but the countries, we get rid of the idea of that. And so it again isn't hard to do. So there's nothing to kill or die for. Now we're talking about wars here, and all through history there have been these global wars where someone will fight for their country. For instance, take World War II. We all had to fight for our country against the evil Nazis. I think there's no other moment in history that has been more lied about than World War II. We were supposed to be fighting the Nazis, fighting the right wing. The Nazis were National Socialists, so they were left-wing by definition. They were left-wing. And now, after beating them and getting rid of the left, the evil left, then we had the rise of communism, and we fought that back too, because that was an outcropping of World War II. And now America is basically communist. Now the liberals are in control, and they are absolutely insane. And America is dissolving into the same Nazism that we were supposed to have fought decades ago. So we kill and we die for this idea of country needlessly. There is no need for any young man or woman to die for a country because it's illogical. It's illogical. Instead, in World War I and II, we demonized and we put people who were conscientious objectors, so people who objected to the idea of killing strangers, went to prison. So if you refused to fight for your country, they would lock you up as a criminal because you were an evil man. And what were you doing evil if you were saying, well, you know what, I've never been to Germany, never met a German person, I don't think I'm going to kill them. Apparently that makes you a criminal. And no religion too. Again, get rid of religion because again, it's another way of controlling you. So imagine all the people living life in peace, because without countries and religion, and without all these reasons to go to war and kill each other, we just have to have peace. Peace could mean that the most violent act we could do would probably be sport. I mean, if you look at technological innovation, war pushes technology far forward. We ended up going into World War II with crude piston-driven engines in our aeroplanes, and we came out of it with rocket engines in 5 years. That's a huge jump in technology. War is good for that, but so is motor racing. You know, motorcycles go in, 5 years later they come out with much better technology. So do cars, and they come out using less petrol, much faster, much more efficient. In fact, a modern family car today is almost definitely faster than the top-of-the-range racing car from 50 years ago. So we don't need war anymore. We could all live in peace, and we could all compete peacefully through sports and enjoy ourselves. Imagine no possessions. Now this is probably harder, especially for your generation, but imagine you don't own your phone, imagine you don't own your laptop, imagine you don't own any of this crap that you don't need, because possessions are again another way of controlling you. Now my brother's terrible for this. He tends to be a consumer. So he'll always want the latest car. He was always buying the latest motorbike. He always had to have one a little better than mine. I had a BMW GS 1200 once, so he had to go and buy the GS Adventure because it was bigger and better and had more bits bolted to it. And he was that kind of guy, which meant he was always spending money he didn't have. He was always borrowing money, which meant he always had to work harder to pay back the money he'd borrowed to buy things to impress me. And I wasn't impressed. So it didn't make any sense anyway. And of course, consumers themselves, happy people don't go out buying stuff. You don't see very happy people walking around with the latest phone in their hand, and you don't see them looking at on the internet how can they buy the next piece of equipment that they don't really need. Happy people don't spend money. So that's something that they've convinced you to do by keeping you miserable. But the idea of possessions is also, it's a little bit out of date. And this does sound a bit socialist, but bear with me. The idea that you have to own these things, you're not making them. By definition, I did not make this phone. I couldn't make this phone. I barely know how any of the technology works. I could tell you how it works. I could tell you what's in there. I could tell you it's got a processor that does this. But when you say, well, what's a processor? Well, I can tell you the function of it. So how do you make a processor? And then my understanding and knowledge of it starts to break down. So, okay, it's silicon chips. But how do you get that silicon chip printed so small? And then, sorry, my information breaks down completely, and I have no idea. And that's a fact. I didn't build that phone. I couldn't build that phone. No one person in the world could build that phone. Certainly not Steve Jobs. He's dead. Instead, a lot of people come together to create a finished product. And who gets the right to own it? Somebody that's worked hard and earned some money, or no, in fact, someone that's borrowing the money to buy it. And that's what we see. And it doesn't make any sense, and it certainly doesn't work. So if we could get rid of the idea that we have to have these possessions, and we're not talking about your clothes. Obviously you can own your clothes, but we're talking about expensive things that we don't really need. Maybe we could get rid of them and live happier, cleaner, healthier lives by not making this junk. iPhones are terrible for this. iPhones have built-in obsolescence. So they literally break down. After a couple of years of using them, they fail, they break down, they stop working, and then you have to buy the latest one. I read an article about shoe measures. Now there was this machine that you used to see in shoe shops where it was like a thing that you put your foot into it, and it would measure your foot, and that would tell you what size shoe you needed. So they would quickly measure your foot, and they'd go away and they'd work out what shoes were best for you. It would measure you in both directions. And when the guy first invented it, they said, make it out of plastic, because plastic breaks. And then they've got to buy another one of your products. And he refused. He built it out of metal. And now some of the original machines that he built, still in use in shops today in England. But they want built-in obsolescence. I had a motorcycle once, an XR400. I had the kickstart only version. A few years later, they made it with electric start because apparently it was so well made that it never broke down. Parts didn't break down, nothing ever went wrong with it. As long as you changed the oil every, I think it was 300 miles or so, it was quite a lot, it would never ever break down. And it didn't. And that was the problem for Honda because they weren't selling spares. So they made a weaker, less efficient version of it so they could sell spares and crap. And this is what we see all around the world. You wait till electric cars come out. It's going to get really bad. So get rid of the idea of possessions so you don't have to work really hard to buy crap you really don't need to impress people that you don't care about. No need for greed or hunger. So if we can get rid of the idea of possessions and that money has value instead of people having value. If people have all the value and not money, then we can start looking after people. And we can recognize that people are our most valuable asset. Not your phones, not your cars, people. So there's no need for greed or hunger. So if you can't measure yourself by the phone in your pocket anymore or the gold and jewelry that you wear, if that means nothing now, then what does mean something? Well, you know, your grades, your abilities, your skills, your talents, your empathy for other people. Suddenly, you have value as a person instead of the things that you own having value by proxy. It makes you a better, more valuable person. So there's no need for greed or hunger because if you see somebody hungry, you feed them. And there's no need for greed because you can't get more things. That doesn't mean status anymore. Having 2 or 3 phones in your pocket or the very latest laptop means nothing. What means something is your ability to use those tools to produce something beautiful or special. So imagine all the people sharing all the world. So in other words, and this is a problem we have today, the government say to us, oh, we're overpopulated. We are not overpopulated. If the entire population of Earth was put in one city, with the population density of New York City in America, we wouldn't fill one state in America. One state. The whole human race can easily be put into one city and it would be fine. Our problem is greed, and not your greed and not my greed, but the greed of the very, very rich. And we're talking about it's not even 1% anymore, it's 0.5%. Those very, very wealthy people who are snatching everything up, stealing it and keeping it for themselves. They are the problem. We have a problem with putting all the food out fairly and spreading things out so that everybody gets their share. Instead, everything's got to be made a profit on, and all that profit is going to a tiny minority. That's the greed we need to remove. So if we shared all the world, so all you have is what you need, and everybody else has what they need. Nobody has to be hungry, nobody has to be greedy, everybody gets a better life. And this is the chorus. You may say I'm a dreamer, because this is a dream. It's not going to happen in my lifetime or your lifetime necessarily, unless people really want it. And most people aren't ready for this. I think this song came out in the 70s. People didn't understand it then. They certainly don't understand it now. I would say we've actually gone backwards, not forwards. So this is a dream, and maybe you're a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. And it's spreading like cancer to capitalism. This one idea that we could all come together and we could all live in peace, sharing all the things that we need out and getting rid of our stupid ideas that have held us back. Maybe it's a dream, but I'm not the only person dreaming it. And I hope someday that you'll join us and the world will live as one. So he hopes one day everybody will share this dream of a better world where we can all live peacefully, and then start to look out at other challenges like going off into space and populating Mars, because believe me, Elon Musk and people like him are never going to get to Mars because they're doing it out of greed, and that never ever works. Okay, so that's what this poem is all about, and that's why song lyrics like this have become the new poetry. So that's what this song is all about, and I hope that's given you some ideas and things to think about. So I want you to do the questions on the next page. That is 1 through 9, and then we'll very quickly go through the answers. Okay, let's go through the answers. Questions 1 through 9. Who wrote the song lyrics? Forgot his name. John Lennon. I was thinking Steve Lennon. I knew it was Lennon. What would you feel about the past and future if you were living for today? Well, if you were living for today, then the past would be something you could learn from, and the future is something you could aspire to. So the future should be where we plan, where we want to be, where we're driving today to get to tomorrow. So in other words, when you come to school, you can appreciate the moment. You can enjoy learning because you've got a goal in mind that's the future, and you can look back to the past where you made your mistakes and say, well, I'm never going to do that again because I've learned my stupid lessons. But I don't see any evidence of that because I see people make the same stupid mistakes every time. And you know what I'm talking about. You've just had a round of first semester exams. How many of you actually prepared for those exams? How many did the work? How many created a review guide where you went through it and planned it all out for yourselves? And I bet it's less than 5% of you. Okay? And I bet it's the same people that made it a mistake last time, make the same mistakes this time. Because you didn't learn from your lessons, because you're not living for today. You're dreaming too far in the future about one day being a CEO. But how are you going to be a CEO if you fail all of your exams? You're not living for the moment. And that's what we're trying to talk about here. Why would there be nothing to kill for or die for if there were no countries? Because you wouldn't belong to anybody. They can't make you go out and kill for England if you don't care about England. If England doesn't exist anymore and they say, oh, go and kill France. Well, there's no such thing as France. So go and kill that person over there. Well, why? What has that person done? Well, nothing. They just live in a different country. So kill them. There are no countries. You see how it all apart if we can take out the illusion that we're a tribe that belongs in one place, they're a tribe that belongs in another place, therefore we must kill each other. We're not even fighting for resources anymore. We're just killing because he comes from a different place to this person. What is the alternative to having people belonging to countries? Well, that's a difficult question because it doesn't really address the song. The song suggests that instead of belonging to countries, I do like the word belonging. You don't belong to anybody, or you shouldn't do. If you do belong to somebody, then you've given your power away. That's up to you. We would all belong to ourselves. We would all choose what we want to do. So government shouldn't be government. We shouldn't even be calling it government. Government should be management. They should be managing our roads. They should be managing our schools. They should be making sure that someone collects our dustbins. That's what they should be doing. They shouldn't be thinking that they are allowed or entitled to tell anybody what to do. Government around the world should only be there to make sure the country functions. That's it. They should be managing the country for us on our behalf because we don't want to. It's a miserable, horrible job. We don't want to do it. We'd happily pay somebody else to do it. That's what government should be. We don't want them telling us what to do. So the idea is, if we could get rid of all that, then you're just one person. And these people lose power over us. We gain control over ourselves, and everybody would be happier because we could all follow our own path. Do you think there would be peace if there were no countries? Why? Well, that's again a difficult question. Eventually, yes. If we were smart enough to get rid of the idea of countries, then yes, eventually, yes, this would work. But we'd also have other problems in the way. Religion, power, money, resources. We have to get rid of all of those ideas before we can eventually be one peaceful people. We have to take away need. And it's very difficult to do when you realize who we are as a people. We are intelligent, logical human beings, but we're also animals at the same time. And some people let the animal in control. And you're encouraged to do it because the animal makes stupid decisions. That's why they apply emotional arguments to you instead of logical ones. The logical mind will see through it, and you're encouraged to think emotionally because then you're easy to trick. What problems would there be if one group of people possessed great wealth and another group had nothing? Well, of course, that's inequality, and the people who have nothing would want to take their share from the rich people. And then we have this other argument. What is your rightful share of something else that somebody else has worked for? Now, if you've got rich people who are rich because they have worked really hard to raise farms, so they've created food and they've got plenty of wealth from it, and then a bunch of people who've sat there in the dirt said, you know what, I want some of that, I want my share. Well, it's not your share because you didn't put in the work. So we've got to realize that the resources that created it are everybody's, but the work that went into it, that belongs to the people that did it. So we'd have this problem around the world of some people being lazy, some people not. We'd have to see how that panned out, but eventually we would come down to human nature. Who are we as a people? And the fact is we don't know, because this has never really been given a chance to be tried. I mean, we're heading towards communism here, which I feel is ultimately inevitable. We are going to go through a state of socialism before we grow out of this and become a human race of one people, if that's possible for humans. Fact is, we don't know. But when we've tried communism on a small local level, it hasn't worked, and it has spectacularly failed to work. Why would you be accused of being a dreamer if you had the ideas in this song? Because they're not realistic. Unfortunately, they are not realistic. Whether human nature even allows for this to happen is open to debate. Certainly what we've seen is communism and socialism around the world. And those things have been horribly corrupted by very corrupt leadership. We see this in China, we see this in Russia, we see this in other countries like France even, when they had a republic. Whenever this has been tried, it has always been corrupted by corrupt leadership. We would need to remove the need for corruption. We would need to have the motivation for it taken away as well. So at the moment, this is an impossible dream, but dreams create reality. What is the writer's hope for the future? Well, presumably he didn't hope to get shot by a crazy man. Rumour has it that he was actually killed by the CIA. They were scared of this growing movement for peace. They were scared of peace. Think about that for a minute. The writer's hope for the future is that we can wake up and realise that there is a better way. Because the way we're running the world now, it's not tenable. We can't carry on like this. And the main purpose of this song is to inspire the idea that there is a better way to live and that we really are just one people. He wrote a lot of songs like this. There was another one, Ebony and Ivory. Ebony being black, ivory being white. Ebony and ivory come together in perfect harmony. So the idea is that someone isn't your enemy because of the colour of their skin. And this was in the 70s, and this was already dealt with. Racism had been sorted out. The left have brought it back to cause problems. That's the way government works in places like America at the moment. They create a problem, and then they offer you a solution that doesn't work, but it creates a new problem, and then they're there with their new solution. And we end up getting herded along like cattle. Those are people that don't think because they're emotional now and not logical. Ebony and ivory, people can come together and realise that we're not that different. We're really not that different. I've used this before, I apologise for going over it again, but we are 99% chimpanzee. Me, you, a guy in Africa, a guy in Iran, we're 99% chimpanzee. We're the same as a chimpanzee. 1% differentiates modern humans, modern anatomically human humanoids from chimpanzees. 1%. So how different can I be from an African woman? Not very is the answer. I mean, you're 54% banana. You know, our DNA is like that. We're very similar. So if we're that close and that similar to each other, then how are we really different? And maybe if we start looking at what makes us the same instead of what makes us different. Now, I've travelled around the world. I got on a motorcycle in London, and I came all the way out here through Europe, the Middle East, Asia, and when you travel with the idea that people are basically the same, it's very easy. There's no culture shock. You just realise, well, you know, this guy loves his kids, wants shelter, wants something to eat, and basically just wants to be left alone to live his life. Most people, that's true. And when you can understand that most people have the same basic drives and motivations through life, it's all very simple. It could be very simple, but we make it difficult. So that's what this is all about. So I've left you some homework. Enjoy your homework, and I will see you next week.